The pink X is here. Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started here shortly. Good morning. Welcome to Cozy Working Group session. If you are not here for that, thank you for taking minutes. So the blue sheets should be making their way around. Important that this is an official IETF meeting, so please note well IPR and copyright and code of conduct items. You've probably already seen this at least once this week so far, but if not, please do take time to read this if you're not familiar. Reminder of where we are having minutes. Do we have anybody willing to JabberScribe? Anybody?
I'll do it except when I'm talking.
Got it. Thank you, Russ. We'll find you a backup, or I will back up.
As long as I'm in the room, I'll back them up.
Thank you. And then also other materials are available on that link if you've downloaded the slides already. So here's our agenda. We're going to start off with well, as we've already started off with administrivia, then going through updates on the BIS with hash algorithms, then the X509, followed by the additional WebAuthn algorithms and suit hash signatures, and then some next steps after this. Any bashing of this agenda? All right. Jim, you're up. It should be Cozy Start.
Set this thing up so I don't have to move around. Okay. That's not me, is it?
No, that was us. That was us.
Okay, so the first document we're looking at is the structure half, which is the document that we're going to try to actually get moved up to full standard. The biggest open issue is some issues around countersignatures. So the first item is when I was actually getting my countersignature code running, I found that it was difficult to actually tell simply if something was a single countersignature or if there were more than one, because in both cases, the first type tag that you looked at was an array. So you actually had to look one more level down to figure out whether there was a single version, a single countersignature, or two. So the thing I'm basically proposing is that we remove the first option in terms of what's there. From the list, we've gotten one person who said, yes, I think that's right too. And I don't believe that there's any countersignature code out there that is actually sending countersignatures around in the wild, which is going to be affected by this. Does anybody know anything differently? Does anybody have any objections to making that change? Okay. Next item. When we compute all of our authentication structures, we've got a context string into everything. And right now, the context string that we use for the countersignature 1 structure is countersignature 0. And it's that way for historic reasons. Specifically, I renamed the structure and I forgot to rename the string. Little details. It wasn't something that I was horribly interested in at the time. I was actually kind of putting it in under protest, but it actually is really needed. So from an aesthetic perspective, it makes sense to do the rename. It is, however, an absolute breaking change for any countersignature 0 messages which exist out in the real world. At this point in time, the only implementations I know of countersignature 0 are mine. And as long as we manage to get this changed before the Contiki version, no, the Californian version is actually published, we're okay. Once the Californian version is published, it's going to be game over on this. So if we do it, we really have to do it this week. Do people have opinions on this?
Carsten Bormann, this is a little bit like looking at an object of art that has a chink somewhere in it. And I think cultures differ in how they look at objects of art with that property. I think a little bit of patina increases the value. And I really wouldn't want to send the signal we are making gratuitous changes here. I mean, it's from a technical point of view, it's gratuitous. It could have been FUBAR, and it would be doing well. And the only thing I see is that editorially this needs to be clearly called out, that this is maybe different from expected. But I don't think there will be a lot of people trapped by violating the principle of least surprise here, because I mean it's obvious that it doesn't work if you use the wrong value.
John Mattsson Eriksson, I think we should fix it while we can. I see no reason not to fix it. And I think even if people, FUBAR might have been better because here you have some idea how it should look like. So people might get it wrong. They might.
Right, but if they get it wrong, they won't be able to run against it. Run it testing against the test suite will fail.
It will fail, but we are creating annoyances in people implementing this for no reason.
Mike Jones, Microsoft. When we violate the principle of least surprise, it's the developers, the implementers who have to build this stuff that get surprised and may in fact do wrong things because they're making assumptions which might have been true but aren't. So I agree with the previous speaker. We should fix this while the fixing's good.
Brendan Moran, ARM. While we may only know of one implementation that exists, that doesn't mean there aren't more out there. And this potentially could cause breaking changes within infrastructure of people who haven't published publicly. I think this is a really dangerous change, and without significant input from the community, I think it's quite concerning.
So one thing I will note is we did send out a notice a few weeks ago asking about this and got very little response so far. So this has been on the mailing list. I do, like, we understand the this is why we're discussing it now also.
No, I understand that, but I mean, to me, this is a structure revision. This would mean that you need to version the spec.
Carsten Moorman, also you actually have to answer to ask the question at the time this document is published, because there is this period of time when people still only find 8152 in the RFC set, and they just aren't aware that this is happening here, and we don't have the perfect marketing machine that pushes this out. So there is a race condition, and we don't have to have this race condition.
And even if we put an errata on the document today, people have a strong tendency to miss reading erratas.
Absolutely.
What's your advice?
My advice?
Yeah.
I'm scared of making a change. So, I mean, personally, other than it's a little bit of a jump for people who actually are doing the implementations, I think that given that we may also immediately point to test vectors that are out there and are correct right now, not doing it is probably the correct answer.
This is Russ Housley. So that makes sense to me. Maybe the thing to do is in the new one, add a small implementations considerations that says, note the tags are the same. Here's how you deal with it.
Okay.
So for notes, then let's, so we could take a hum to get verification on which way we want to go here. So with this is the counter signature context string. If you think that the existing counter signature 0 string is acceptable to keep potentially with the implementation note or other callouts, we'll do a hum for that. We'll do a hum for changing it to counter signature 1. So let's start with the first one. So those that think that we should leave well enough alone and add a call out, please hum now. And for those that think we should change it now to match what the actual structure is, please hum now.
You got
it. All right.
That was too close to call.
All right. So we chairs will make one more call on the list to get some confirmations of see if we can nail this down better. So if we can take a note that an action item for the chairs to verify.
And we need to make it really, really fast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just note that this was a hum between making a technical change and not making a technical change?
Correct.
So there should be a default action.
Well, that's very fair. So, I believe that the charter already says we're making the minimal changes we believe. So the default answer is going to be if we can't find consensus, then things stay the way they are.
Okay. The counter signature 0 stuff was added kind of at the last minute when we were doing the original document. So right now, all of that stuff is sitting in an appendix. So from it, just pure editorial reorganization, we probably should move the counter signature 0 stuff out of the appendix and put it in with the same counter signature stuff. The question that I have is, should we make counter signatures be a subsection of signing, which is what they currently are, or should they be a top level section of their own equivalent to doing signing and encryption and macking, because it's kind of this own thing, kind of not is. And it's basically for people who read the document, are they going to find it easier to find things that way than the other way?
This is Russ Housley. You can't countersign if you didn't first sign.
Yes, you can. You can countersign an encrypted message.
What does that mean?
The exact same thing.
No. That doesn't make sense to me. I think if you organize it so that counter signatures, even if syntactically what you said is true, are part of confirming someone else's signature, then people will use it in a way that doesn't surprise receivers.
Okay. The group OSCORE document, which is in the core group, is doing counter signatures on encrypted messages to mean who actually is the person who sent the message. Because everybody's sharing a group key, you want to know who in the group did it. And what we're doing to do that is we're signing signing on the outside rather than signing on the inside.
You're backing on the inside, signing on the outside.
So,
So right now we're already violating the Russ thinks this is not a bright idea.
That's right.
well, what Russ said is true in principle, but the actual evidence doesn't have to be part of the data structure. I mean, if I'm countersigning something because of evidence that I'm not going to add to the data structure, that's a very valid thing. I have trouble understanding why this would not be valid.
So the description of Mac, encrypt, sign, moving from the inside out.
We're actually only doing encrypt and then sign. But yeah.
Encrypting with a group key and then signing so that you would be no different if you used a full signature instead of a counter signature. You'd get the same property.
Yes.
Francesca Palombini, personal opinion, I'd like to have it its own separate section rather than under signature. Of course, you're going to reference the signature section for,
Oh yeah.
but I think, yeah, when you're looking for that, it's simpler to find. I don't know.
Okay. I think I know what I'm doing there.
Right. Yeah, I think we've not heard anybody say, no, please leave it as an appendix.
Definitely.
So I think we can take your discretion at what the edit is, and then when we are going through reviews, then we'll address it then. But at this point, then I think we can trust Jim to make the changes that are relevant.
Last item on this slide. We have gotten CBORD tags assigned for encrypt, encrypt 0, Mac 0, sign 0, sign 1. We didn't do one for counter signatures because I didn't think about it. And I'm not too sure that it makes sense. I'm basically bringing it up at this point just purely as a completeness issue. So I don't know of any situation where one would have a counter signature floating around on its own. A detached counter signature, such that it would actually need to be tagged as a counter signature.
Even Carson can't come up.
Okay, I will take that as we don't deal with anything with that particular, with getting the tag. If we really need the tag, if someone comes up with something interesting, we can get it later.
Carsten Morman, I'm very much against proof by lack of imagination. I think completeness just calls for doing this. It doesn't cost very much. I mean, it costs one CBOR tag. Depending on how long you make it, that cost can be very low. And it makes it available for when it's needed, and then you don't need to suddenly start doing complicated things.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't need to be a 1 byte tag. Okay, does anyone else have an opinion? Which way do we go?
Well, so this was discussed at the virtual interim briefly with we'll ask for it when we need it, and now we've gotten at least one opinion of we should just ask for it now. And so nobody else has anything they'd like to say on this one. I suppose we can run a hum to see whether we should register for one now. So if you think we should register for a countersignature CBOR tag with this document at this point, please hum now. And if you think we should not register a tag at this point, please hum.
Slightly over.
All right. So I think what we're hearing is we leave well enough alone for now. Oh, you said for slightly for registering. Yeah. Okay. So, okay, we will register for one. Then we'll add that to the document. Do you think it needs an early? I don't think it needs an early registration.
No. We'll go ahead and put it in the document, and people can argue about it once it's there. Things which basically I don't necessarily know what we're doing with, or just to basically I need input. I rewrote the IANA considerations to basically only have the things that IANA is supposed to do when this document shows up, rather than having all of the old registrations in the IANA sections, to make it easier for IANA. And also because I've been getting pushback on some other documents I've written from the IESG about why does this section say that you're making these registrations when they have already been done? So it makes, rather than trying to say these are historic registrations and these are current registrations, I'm just deleted everything that was historic and just keeping what's current. We also, at the virtual, talked briefly about whether or not we needed to update the instructions for the designated experts. At that meeting, I was tasked with doing a poll of the current set of designated experts to find out what their opinions were, and everybody who replied to me, which was, I'm not sure it was all of them, but it was almost all of them, basically said, we don't have enough experience with things going wrong yet to think that we need to update them. Which I think is a perfectly fair statement. And if we need to change them later, that's still relatively easy to do. Currently, the document has a downref to the CBOR document. On the other hand, the CBOR document, in theory, is going to get out of the CBOR working group at some point in the hopefully not too long distant future, at which case we won't have the downref. But if we do end up racing out before they do, we either need to justify the downref or we're going to sit in the RSC editor queue waiting for it to show up. And that's just, I'm highlighting that as something that may be an issue, because in talking to the chairs, we're looking at saying we want to try for a working group last call somewhere around the Montreal timeframe, so that we can get this to the ISG and hopefully done before I start making Hawaii in September. I now actually have a little bit more control over that than I used to, since I'm now one of the co-chairs of that working group.
I was about to ask if the co-chairs have any thoughts on this they'd like to share.
What's the milestone?
Francesca Balombini. So the milestone was October 2018 for that document, just for your information.
We all know milestones are suggestions.
Yeah.
But in reality, how do you feel like the document is?
Yeah, I think we are close. Yeah, I think we should make it probably by Montreal. I hope so.
One of the things that is part of the issue of which document that we reference is we do discuss some canonical encoding issues in our document. And we currently right now refer to 7049 in terms of defining how some of those canonicalization things work. The new CBOR document now has a couple of different things in it which say different things. One of the words, which I believe has completely disappeared at this point, is the word canonicalization. But the rules that we use can refer to either of the two recommended serialization things in the document. So I think we can update this without a problem. It's just a question of race conditions.
Right. So the CBOR-BIS wording does not use the word canonicalization. Of course, it points back to 7049 because there is a technical difference between the recommendation in 7049 and the recommendation that is in there right now. In either case, it's a recommendation. So you need to specify, even if you just say, do it like the recommendation says. Yeah, I think we are fine. And just as one of the things for the technical checklist, let's try to make sure that we are not creating any difference here. So your rules are a proper subset of the recommendations. And
my rules are definitely a proper subset, because the only real rule that we use is minimal encoding.
yes.
So, Lawrence Thunblade. The CBOR canonicalization and deterministic encoding has always been a bit weird to me. My preference would be to just take the canonicalization needed for COSE into the COSE spec and just drop the reference. Just seems like that would be cleaner to me, because the canonicalization needed for COSE is pretty small and specific, where the general rules seem, I don't know, more general, and it seems like it might be cleaner to do that.
I'm going to have to go back and actually reread what's there. I believe the only thing we point back to is we point back to say that defines how you do minimal encoding lengths. because we don't actually have we don't have a method for saying that in our document at the moment.
Yeah, so the editorial intent is to improve on the section that defines this minimal encoding. It's no longer part of the deterministic encoding. It's called preferred encoding now. And the deterministic encoding is preferred encoding plus map key sorting. But in any case, I think what the application, the CBOR application protocol COSE does, it's nice if you follow the recommendations of CBOR-BIS here, but CBOR-BIS really doesn't have a busyness in making you any and tell you how to do it. That's your decision. And on the other hand, the application protocol doesn't have any business telling the serialization protocol what the recommendation for other application protocols should be.
And the other thing too is when we point back into the CBOR document, we can point back into the BIS document has kept the 7049 method in the document. Yes. And we can still just refer to that method without having to, in terms of that tells you how to do minimal encoding.
Yes, but that would be confusing, because it would send the message that you have to have the old full
Okay. Yeah.
old 7049 canonicalization to do COSE, and that's not true. If you have the CBOR-BIS deterministic encoding, you have everything you need to do COSE. You have more than you need to do COSE. So I would explicitly not refer to the old recommendation.
Okay.
Which only differ in the way they do map key sorting anyway.
Right. Yeah. In terms of encoding integers and arrays and byte strings, they're identical, which is all we care about. Okay. I'm going to look at it and see how much work it is to pull the minimal encoding lengths into our document, and if it's too much work, I'll just refer to the newer sections in the new document. Interop status. One of the things that we're supposed to do is to provide the IESG some level of, yes, we actually have multiple implementations at Interop. And what we provide is whatever the ADs happen to want on that particular day. So the chairs and I and the ADs need to sit down and at some point agree on what it is that we're going to send up. We actually have 3 different families of implementations. I've got 3 implementations. There's also an implementation in JavaScript and an implementation in Python. They are not complete in terms of they don't all do counter signatures. They don't all implement all of the different algorithms that you could do. The JavaScript one I know only does ECDSA and ECDH. It doesn't do any of the Edwards curves. But from an from the point of doing interoperability and giving the report to that, I don't believe that matters, because that's underlying cryptographic algorithms that has nothing to do with how COSE itself is structured. So you can look at the messages, you can build signed messages, you can tear apart signed messages, and they work. It doesn't matter which signature algorithm you're using under the covers. We'd hoped to actually do a little bit of interop testing at the hackathon, but we didn't have anybody else who showed up, so that didn't happen. We need to try to do a little bit of formal interop testing sometime between now and Montreal if we can.
Brendan Morin. I just wanted to make a note about interop and some of the content in the RFC. It's not spelt out very clearly exactly what the contents of a signature field are. The problem that this has caused for me has been that all of the crypto libraries I have access to default to producing an ASN1 encoded signature. And so the two fields have to be extracted from that to put them in a COSE signature container, and a naive implementation will just put the whole thing in there and thus not interop.
Okay, I presumably that's the ECDSA, DSA, right? RNS, yeah.
Roman Danilo, unrelated. So given that there's the family of all these implementations, you were pointing to some of them, where is the one unified place where I can go and see a list of them?
If you go to the COSE working group GitHub repository, you will find the C# version, the Java version, and the C version, all which are the three of mine. And I am going to be putting pointers on the README page of this particular document, which is also in the COSE working group, to point to the other two implementations.
Great, thanks.
So to leave the subject of this working group for a couple of seconds, that is of course a question that comes up for other CBOR-based formats like CNML and so on as well. And my plan is to extend the CBOR.io site in such a way that it can carry pointers to implementations of COSE, CNML, SUIT, and so on. So I will contact you after the meeting, sometime after the meeting, to collect that information.
I started the implementation, but I don't even know if it's worth calling implementation. I only implemented what was needed for group OSCORE and ad hoc, and only one way, encryption, so I can produce test vectors. But
How do you know your test vectors are right? Okay. Going forward, anyone who's implementing and has feedback on something that's not clear, something that needs to be done better, I want to hear about it, because that's the whole purpose of doing this revision, is to make things clearer for implementers. Does anybody else have any other issues with regarding the structure draft?
So far, you're 3 minutes over. Just fine.
I've got used up the whole hour. So the algorithms draft. It's got the GitHub repository. There's almost no changes in the actual contents at this point in time. Given the what you had, I'll pull that in for the ECDSA. There's actually, if you go to the README, there's actually 2 pointers to RFC diff, which will actually compare the current version and 8152. So you can actually look to see what changed between everything. I don't know of any open issues on this particular document, or I didn't. I've got one now. But if I missed anything, I want to hear about it. So where we're headed, I need to clean up this security considerations. I didn't bother actually rewriting them so that both the structure and the algorithm draft currently have exactly the same content, and I don't think that's probably correct. I need to do grammar and spelling pass. I need to check for some of the missing pointers back to the original draft, and I want to copy over a bit of the code in terms of what you need to put into the protected header fields and what you need to put in the unprotected header fields for some of the algorithms, just so people don't have to flip back and forth between the two documents. Does anybody else have any thing that they want to talk about on that document? Okay. There have been a few requests for us doing new algorithms. The biggest one has been the padded key wrap. And one of the questions that I had for Russ that went on the mailing list was, are you doing this as a content encryption algorithm or as a key wrap algorithm? And what I got back was the primary use case that he had in mind was for it to be a content encryption algorithm of a key, but not a key relative to the COSE message. We're just doing a key distribution for something else. The one pushback that I have about doing this is going to be our first AE algorithm only. So it is not an AEAD algorithm as near as I can. I don't believe there is a version which is. Is there? Okay, I couldn't find it. We'll have to sit down and look.
It could be, but I don't know of anyone who uses it that way, right? So there's no external data that is MAC'd.
Yes.
In any implementation I'm aware of. I don't remember seeing one in the spec that I read. It may be one in a different spec. So the only question in terms of that is, as a content encryption algorithm, is do people think it's a problem setting that precedent? That we have a content encryption algorithm that is not AEAD? Okay. So there's a whole slew of potential algorithms that we could put into this. Hash algorithms that we don't currently have, although some of those hash algorithms are in the hash draft. They could basically, there's all sorts of signature algorithms that we could be adding, key wrap algorithms, MAC algorithms, KDF algorithms. So basically at this point, it's if you have any particular things that you want to have added in this new draft, speak up on the list. Be prepared to give a case as to why you think it should be added. Because I will tend to push back on everything, even the ones I want to add. We'll have to make sure that the AD is happy that we can do this in our charter, because our charter says we'll do the things which are needed by suit and other types of people. And these are probably algorithms which they are not directly asking for. We're just doing them.
Cosmo, so my question would be, what exactly is our strategy with for dealing with things like SHA-3? So, I mean, it's kind of inevitable that this has to be added at some point. So why exactly do we want to make it hard for people to use this? Why do we want the first guy who wants to use this have to jump through hoops? I think we are much better off if we ship this with batteries included.
I mean, I think it's like if you, I mean, the question is, you say SHA-3.
Yes.
So when you say SHA-3, do you mean SHA-3 256, SHA-3 512, Shake 128, or Shake 256?
Yes.
I mean, as hash algorithms independently, that's fine. As signature algorithms, you're starting to get a big growth. And there is a question as to how many people are going to be switching to Edwards curves as opposed to staying with ECDA.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Right. So I think my question wasn't specifically about SHA-3, but rather about what is our plan.
And in point of fact, if your justification is the IETF is headed towards doing this, then I think that's a reasonable justification. It's just, if you want to come in and say, I want to do Kangaroo 12, I mean, okay.
The Kangaroo 12 draft can do that. Actually, I think it should.
But there are people who will argue about that because it's a CFRG draft.
Yeah, but it's a registry entry, so registry entries can just be added by CFRG draft. But the interesting observation is that COSE is used by other SDOs, and it would be really useful for them to enable them to skip the INA thing. I mean, I have this other standard where ITU is squatting on code points because they didn't understand the IANA thing. I mean, they are also doing it wrong, which is even worse. But the interesting observation is they're squatting on code points because they didn't figure out how to get the IANA registrations. And I would just like to take a little bit of the sand out of the gears here and just make it easy for other people. So the observation the IETF is going to do this is a good observation, but maybe something is really widely looked at, like SHA-3, should also be a good justification for adding something.
John Mattsson, Ericsson, I think SHA-3 is something that should be discussed and added now. I think the hash algorithm draft made a good choice to standardize the shake, but not the main SHA-3. I think that can be discussed if that is needed as well. But I think shake should be added now. I think KMAC is also a useful algorithm I think should be added now. That's a SHA-3 derived algorithm.
Queen Dang Agnes. I saw from the previous slide, if you and the working group one day decided to do the KDF with KMAC, you could do that with the HKDF, or you could do just KMAC alone. That is an option we specified. Yep, you could use it HKDF, or you just use, one pass KMAC by itself. And both options are fine to us and to me.
And part of this is, if we decide we want to add KMAC, which I think is probably a good idea, that's the sort of discussions we need to have as to how many different variants of it exist. So it's like saying I want to add KMAC is unfortunately not a sufficient answer. You have to say, okay, so do I want to add all the do I want to do it with HKDF or sorry with HKDF? Do I want to do it plain? Do I want to have an implicit tied together, or do I want to do Chinese menu for doing key agreement plus KDF plus key derivation? So
both,
I don't want to do 6,000 different things if people don't think they're going to be using them.
sure. So that is you and the working group will have to decide. But to me and to us, both options are fine in terms of security. HKDF does 2 stages, and KMAC does only 1 stage, means 1 step.
Yeah.
So
and going from HMAC SHA-2 to KMAC is already gaining you 1 step,
yes.
one fewer steps.
Yes, like 2 or 3, because for the HMAC you do, if the key is not the right size, you have to hash it, and then you hash the key with the XOR value, and then you hash in the message all together. So that's so yeah.
And that's one of the reasons how come, I put KMAC on the list is I think it's interesting. I mean, in terms of the key wrap algorithms, the KWF one I put on there, I don't know that anybody knows what it was. I didn't until the middle of February when I was trying to find something else, and I ran across, this is a hash-only key wrap algorithm. And I haven't torn it apart enough to figure out what it does and how it works. But, if we're looking at post-quantum stuff, then that may be something that's of interest. So anyway, if you have things that you think you want to do, send them to the list. And my current timeline is I'd kind of like to get a rough draft put together for Montreal of what things we should be doing. And that's it.
So, one thing the chairs will note is while the current charter does say we're doing essentially the minimal for this group and our dependent groups, or groups that have dependencies on this work, there is nothing that necessarily stops us from rechartering to do additional algorithms if we can't come to an agreement relatively quickly. So, something to keep in mind.
Hash algorithm document. So what's currently in the document? SHA-1, a few different SHA-2 variations, and 2 shake algorithms. The SHA-1 is going into the registry marked as deprecated, but it is there because a lot of people, it's still perfectly good to use SHA-1 for certain types of things. If what you're doing is saying, I want to just filter out I've got a whole slew of certificates, I want to get the ones that are possible. It's like if you get 2 or 3 back, it doesn't really make a difference because you just check each one of them until you find the one with the right public key. It's not something that we recommend in signature algorithms anymore, but this is basically just looking at hashes. So depending on how you're using it, it's not a huge problem to use SHA-1, but we're really pushing to people to move off of SHA-1, so that's why it's marked as deprecated. I don't know that there's a problem with the fact that we don't have a 512-bit strength SHA-3. But I don't know. I'm never positive that Shake 256 and SHA-512 have the same security level.
Quinn Dang again. I saw you wrote something like SHA/64 or something. What does that mean?
SHA-256 truncated to the first 64 bits.
You take only 64 bits out as a hash value?
Yes.
That's dangerous. Shouldn't do it.
If what I'm doing is saying, here's a thumbprint of a certificate, and I want to send minimal bytes across, it doesn't matter if I find extra certificates. I just want to reduce the universe that I'm looking at.
Okay, I'm not quite capture what you're using for, but I have to think about exactly what the application for. So you want like it's an index kind of looking for things? Not okay. Then that's would be.
There is an RFC with guidance to use half as a minimum, but I'd have to go back and look to see which RFC that is.
So with
Kathleen Moriarty. Not for Wikis, okay.
Right, not for what I'm talking about.
so it's like random index value for certain objects.
This is like, a thumbprint of a certificate.
And then you had a question regarding to Shake 256 and SHA-3 512.
Yeah.
They,
Are they the same strength?
they both provide 256 bits of security.
Okay.
The SHA-3 512 has 512 bits of pre-image and second pre-image resistance. But that is essentially, but collision is 256 bit of collision resistance strength. And so 256 bits of security is more than enough. So you don't need or anything go to 512 for anything. And but by doing that, you burn in a double energy, energy consumption, and your function would be twice slow. From shake 512, shake 256 to SHA-3 512. So yeah.
Guys, so back to the /64 thing there. What I hear you saying, I would translate into, this is not a cryptographic hash function.
This is a cryptographic hash function I'm not using as one.
Yeah, so I think it is useful to have these things that cannot really be used as cryptographic hash functions. I have a couple I would actually like to add, which most definitely are not cryptographic. And I'm wondering whether this is the right space to do it. Because it's really useful to have numbers for those two.
That's not a hash function.
It's not a hash function. But there are, so we have this other protocol called constraint cast, which uses different hash functions. And it would be nice to just have one registry where we have these hash functions, so we don't have to create a hash function registry just for constraint cast.
I think that this is potentially a perfectly valid place to do that, because they could be used. Yeah.
But then we should very, very clearly call this out.
Yes. Yeah.
John Mattsson, I think Kangaroo 12 is interesting and supported adoption CFRG, but I think it's too early for COSE. I think that has to wait a year or more.
So right now, the recommended value that I've got on the SHA-256/64 is no, because it doesn't really provide the collision resistance that you want. But I think it makes sense especially if we're going to add the additional algorithms into this table, to put another column into it, which describes something about the functions that that could be used for. So in terms of if you're looking for collision resistance as opposed to just filtering. So that's clearer in the IANA registry. Kathleen looks puzzled.
Yes. Kathleen Moriarty. So I just making sure I heard what I thought I heard. So you're going to drop the truncation?
No.
Is that okay?
I'm going
That's
to
what I
add
thought I
a
heard.
column into the registry, which says that things like SHA-256/64 should not be used for X. But
Okay.
As opposed to just saying recommended is no.
Okay, great. I thought you were saying you were dropping it completely. I want to think about this a bit more. Just in terms of, I don't know what I'm going to need.
Right. If people want to give me some input in terms of, or the designated experts, of which I'm one, input in terms of how frequently they think these hash algorithms are going to be used, just in terms of whether we assign some of the 1 byte space as opposed to assigning 2 byte identifiers to them, I'd like to hear that. As of right now, it's probably the one that Suit is going to be using all the time is going to be a 1 byte, and everything else is going to be a 2 byte.
John Mattsson, I think how often is it used is not the only criteria. It's probably how often is this going to use in a very constrained environment. If it's very well used in a cloud environment where you have no constraints, you can assign something bigger anyway. So, yeah.
So just a comment from the suit perspective, the current version of the draft is actually importing hash identifiers from the named information draft. If that needs to be adjusted, we can do that, but that's currently where we're finding the algorithm identifiers because there weren't any in COSE. Brendan Moran. Yeah.
Right, and this draft is in part response to the needs that were expressed from the suit. I've been basically kind of against to having COSE define a hash structure, and because it tends to be one of those things that, well, it depends on what other information you're using. So the question at this point is really, do we put one into the hash draft, or do we put one into the X509 draft?
So what would be the use case you would be addressing with that example?
Well, I mean, we need to define it for X509. So we have to define a structure which says I've got a hash and I've got a value. And the question is whether people in general would want to do that, or as I generally recommend, they should be defining their own structure. So I said, Sue, you should define your own COSE structure, your own seaboard structure for this, because you may want to put in things other than just the hash identifier and the hash value. You may want to put in things like a pointer to what it is that you're hashing.
Yeah, that's why it would be an example. But
Yeah.
Okay, mirroring something that people know from the SN1 world and say this is how you would do that in the COSE world, I think that's a good criterion for choosing an example.
Okay. I'll put one in and we'll see whether the people object. So documents missing the security considerations at this point. And then there's just a couple of procedural questions. If suit wants to use this, then we need to do early assignment of at least some of the identifiers, the ones that they want to be using. And there's a procedural question in terms of timing. This potentially could be going into working group last call even before the BIS documents. If all I'm doing is writing considerations and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, we could see about a last call before the 8152 BIS. I think the general track we've been running is trying to make sure we're focused on the core drafts, the core BIS drafts first. But if there's energy to get more done, we can certainly approach that.
So what is stopping us from last calling this?
Right now, the fact that I need to put in security considerations.
Okay.
And then editorial.
Yeah,
Right,
but
and an editorial pass.
When you have checkboxed everything that was on the slides, is there anything remaining?
Nope.
So I don't see a reason to make our life difficult with early assignment and so on, instead of just shipping this thing.
Okay. Okay, so I think the action there is we, once you have those the security considerations and the editorial, and preferably an editorial pass, then we can start a last call.
Okay. Next presentation.
Oh, there it goes.
We've got a certificate for using, or we've got a draft for being able to carry X519 certificates in COSE messages or something similar. So right now we have attributes defined for a bag asserts, a chain asserts, the thumbprint of the cert, and a URL that points to a certificate. The defaults in terms of what you are referring to, whether you're referring to something on the signer's end, and on the originator's end, or something on the recipient's end, depends upon whether you're looking at signing or key agreement. Signing, it refers to the originator's end. Key agreement, it refers to the recipient's end. Which meant that when I sat down to actually start doing things, I said, oh my gosh, I need to do something for static as well. So I also have added some duplicate stuff for static. I did not duplicate the bag asserts because that seemed insane. A single bag is sufficient. You shouldn't need two. So some of the open issues that we need to look at. Is there anyone?
Can you explain static more what you did?
There are now two header attributes that you would put in for a static. One identifies the sender certificate, and one identifies the recipient certificate. I know what I'm doing.
I just didn't understand what you said.
So do we want to do an extended key usage? My inclination is no. But if there's anyone who wants to restrict certificates to just being COSE, then it makes sense to do it. Do we want to worry about transporting revocation information? Again, my answer is probably not. If someone really needs to do it, then I want to know about it. But other than that, I don't care. This actually does define a COSE hash structure. If we put it over into the hash document, we can just point to it rather than defining another one here. SAFA 166, it doesn't really matter one way or the other as far as I'm concerned. The CBOR, the URL right now is set up to say, put the CBOR URI tag on it. And that's probably redundant, since you know that's the only thing that's going to be in that field. So my inclination right now is I'm going to remove that unless someone has a reason to say no.
Cosmo, so if this is an extension point where you might want to plug in another type of external reference instead, the tag makes sense. If it isn't, it shouldn't be there because it's just inviting you to use it as an extension point.
Mike Jones, Microsoft. In the Jose context, as you probably recall, when we were asked to add the X509 certificate fields, X5C and the thumbprint, etc., one of the things that at least the Jose working group decided to do was say essentially that the certificate was always extra information which you could ignore if you didn't need it. And the way they did that was to say that if you had a certificate, the JWK representation of the public key
That's on the next slide.
must also be present. If you have another slide, please proceed.
I mean, this is basically, I'm just pointing to it. I don't have a JDEV. I don't have any. We don't carry keys in messages right now. That's a difference between Cozy and Jose. So one of the questions is, do we do something, what do we want to do with certificates and Cozy keys? As Mike was saying, what Jose did was say that the certificate is parallel to the key that's already in there, which means that you potentially have to do some extra checks to make sure that what's in the certificate and what's in the JWK are consistent with each other. The other way you could do it is we can say, we're not going to make them, because we're not going to do that, because you're either going to do one or the other. You're not going to end up doing both. So what we could do for that is we could basically create a new key type for Cozy keys, which says, this is an X509 certificate. It also gives us a way forward, because one of the issues that was raised on the mailing list within the last week is, well, what happens if what I want to do is use a JWT? So you could basically identify a JWT the same sort of way, and if you want to carry it in a key, which makes my implementation easier, because then I'm still just carrying keys, passing keys into the implementation, and it's up to the implementation to figure out what to do with a certificate or with a CWT. We don't have any implementation experience playing with this, but there is at least one standards group which wants to get a code point for at least the things that go into the Cozy signature, Cozy encryption document or objects. So we can basically get to potentially do early adoption on those. That is those four things, but not actually finish processing the document until we have had some good discussion on how we deal with Cozy keys.
Mike again, I guess thinking about the Jose context, we put in X509 certificate representations because a lot of people had and still do have tools that if you were generating a key, that was the wrapper that they got it in, and they had things to consume it. But we, as an explicit transition step, wanted to also make it possible for people to deploy without having to have an ASN.1 parser, etc. I realize the application context and motivation here is a little different, and I don't have a firm conclusion in my mind, but I'd at least like people to think about making an explicit choice about, do we always want a CBOR key representation, even if there's an ASN.1 key representation?
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. Signed exchanges don't use Cozy, so it's not directly applicable. But as a data point, let's see, first, your document says that a chain has to be linear, that each one is signed by the next one. In order to support different routes on different consumers, we specified that the first one is the leaf, but then the ones after that just are a collection of, are kind of a bag that you can build chains out of, that the system has to kind of search through those certificates to its root. So think about whether that's what you want. And second,
Jeff, what application context was that?
this was for signed exchanges for in web packaging. So mostly desktop and phones rather than really constrained spaces.
Does anyone know if TLS has changed from, TLS used to be a straight chain, and I don't know if they changed or not. Okay.
I
was just saying,
believe.
no, they didn't.
Okay.
That's not correct.
Oh, it is now just the first one is the end entity cert, and then you can have a random set after that?
You do not include the trust anchor.
Right.
And,
But
and the leaf is included, and the rest are you may find these helpful.
okay, so it's the same sort of thing. It makes sense to change to that then.
Russ Housley.
And the second data point was we do send revocation information. We send an OCSP response, and we also include a signed certificate timestamp for certificate transparency. So think about including that in your list.
Carsten, now that you talk about parallel copies of the same thing, how about the thumbprint and the URL?
Why do you think those are? Oh, you want to have put both of them in?
Yes.
I don't know of any reason why you couldn't. We do not. The document does not say you can only have one of these.
Oh, good.
Russ Housley again. I'm worried about including both a raw key and a certificate if you don't have any ability to pull the public key out to do a compare to make sure they are consistent. You're going to end up essentially ignoring the cert, so why did you even put it in?
John Mattsson, does the document describe how to handle two of these? Should be clear if it's and or do you have to choose, or do you need to make sure that both match, or
Two of which?
thumbprint and URL?
No, it doesn't. If one of them's wrong, that's life.
This is Jeffrey Yaskin again. I haven't read your spec in detail. Do you talk about signing over the certificate? And if so, what do you sign over?
No, we don't talk about signing over the certificate. You could put this in as a protected header, in which case the signature would cover it. So you do have the option of making it a protected or an unprotected header.
Right.
I believe the document says this can be an unprotected header because it is internally signed and needs to be verified. And if it is removed, it does not affect the evaluation of the message per se.
Right. So yeah, TLS signs over it. Signed exchanges include both a URL and a thumbprint. And there's a question of, is it the thumbprint of the leaf certificate or the whole chain? And we sign over the thumbprint.
Okay, so those I think are still open issues for discussion on the list. And then, of course, there's the standard question. What did I miss? Going forward, still haven't written the security considerations for this document either. I think we need some implementation experience so we know for sure what is happening on some of these things. But there's still at least one person has asked for some early point assignments for an external standards body. And I think I'm done. They wanted to actually carry a CWT in the message, just like you would carry an X509 certificate. So you have basically a signed thing, which was a bag of statements, which associated a person and a key as a CWT instead of an X509 cert.
I have it in the wrong order. That one's next.
This document does not cover that. That is something that was raised within the last week. And there's two questions. One, do we want to do it? Two is this the appropriate document to do it, or should it be a separate document?
Okay. Thank you, Jim. So I think what I'm hearing for next steps is the document needs some cleanup, and then then we can see where we go from there.
Good morning. I'm Mike Jones from Microsoft, and I'm here to talk about an individual draft that defines some additional algorithms. So what the spec does is registers a number of algorithm identifiers for algorithms that are used by the World Wide Web Consortium WebAuthn standard, which is now a recommendation, meaning it's a final W3C standard. There's 4 RSI signing algorithms that are registered, which weren't already registered for use in COSE, as well as the SecP256K1 curve and signing with that. I'll note that this draft is explicitly intended to fulfill a charter deliverable, which is on the screen there. And just for reference, if you're downloading the slides, this is the final WebAuthn specification URL. The chair has put out a call for adoption as a working group document for this on March 13th to run until about today. I'm not a chair, but I saw a number of people saying, yeah, do that, and nobody's saying don't. Thankfully, I received 2 really good sets of reviews already, one from Jim Schad, one from John Matson, which I've replied to on list. They both found a number of things that they made the same suggestions for, which tells me that, yeah, we should probably do those things, and you can see those on list. Those things that are not as obvious will be the following subsequent slides for input right here and now. Jim correctly pointed out that there's 2 algorithms in WebAuthn that are not in this draft to date. There are a class of algorithms called elliptic curve direct anonymous attestation, ECDAA, that have HOSE style identifiers ED256 and ED512. These were defined by Jan Kamamish of IBM and some additional people, I think Rolf from Knock Knock, and originally done in a FIDO1 UAF context. And WebAuthn does say that you can do attestations about the authentication that occurred using these formats. Now, I will note that the WebAuthn draft has an ionic consideration section and proposes just registering these, referencing this FIDO draft as the primary definitions. We could just decide as COSE to first just ask IANA to process this and have the designated experts either say yes or no. And only if the designated experts say no would we even have any work to do. There's also been questions about, are these great algorithms in the first place, but now we're batting out of my league. Jim Schad coming to the microphone. I suspect as a designated expert.
Jim Schad, designated expert. The only real difference that's going to show up in the registration between doing it here and having the W3C do it is the recommended column would be no, for sure the W3C does it, and it might be either yes or no if we do it.
John Bradley walking to the microphone.
While it is the ECDAA stuff is the product of fine quality crypto researchers in FIDO, there have been a number of external security researchers who have expressed significant concerns about those algorithms. So we should understand what the potential security risks are before we set about blessing them through a registration. It was about 3-4 months ago, there was a bunch of papers and things that came out basically attacking WebAuthn and FIDO because it allowed these algorithms, which at least some people believed had significant flaws. So they're not widely implemented outside of UAF, and they're implemented almost not at all in UAF in reality. So Tony probably has some opinion.
Never.
Tony Nadlin, these are not currently implemented, so I would not go forward with doing these at this time. It doesn't, until there's some implementations that actually shake this stuff out.
Right. And indeed, I was not proposing to put these in this draft. This draft to date consists of well-known algorithms with well-known security properties. And we could finish it very quickly. If we suck this stuff in, we'll be a year plus at least with CFRG involvement and what have you. But I did want to point out that as chartered, we could have included these, and I did not for some of these reasons.
All right. Well, I mean, our charter says we put in things that are needed by others. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to take everything. So just pointing that out. I'm hearing a lot of these. This is really bad. Is there anybody that wants to risk coming to the mic to have a counter argument? Yeah. Okay. So I think we can continue without trying to add these.
Okay, very good. And I will, just as a personal action item, bring this up in the WebAuthn working group and say that was the conclusion here. The document title is, as usual, the subject of more comments than anything else. I chose a very generic title, which was correct, but probably not totally descriptive. And I would be glad to have the title changed in a working group document should such a thing be adopted. Matt Miller.
Sure. Matthew Miller, to color this bike shed. So I did intend to post the list, and I apologize for not doing that. I was ready for adoption myself, although I admit I would have preferred a title that points out this is targeting WebAuthn. That's my personal opinion. We're free to, if there's other feedback, then that would be very helpful.
And I would be fine with the working title, something like additional algorithms used by WebAuthn. I see people nodding. Is anybody retching? Okay, that would be a fine working title after adoption. Thank you. The other piece of feedback that I received from both reviewers is there was a string which came from one implementation that already exists, I think by Vladimir Duzhanov of ConnectID, where he implemented signing using the SEC P256K1 curve, and he called it P256K, and both my reviewers said just call it SEC P256K1. And that makes sense to me. Or was it your implementation?
No, so Phillips Kokan Alt0. The other algorithm name that is, or the other curve name commonly, so this is algorithm name, was K-256. And that one I see more common than this one.
This is the name from the SEC2 document, I believe. Russ is probably SEC1. Okay.
Jim Schott. I don't care what you call it in Jose. You can keep that.
Well, that's the whole point of the slide.
Right.
So
It's just that the descriptive string in the registry was confusing for the COSE side, because that's going to be an integer. It doesn't have that value that
that's
shows up
right.
anyplace.
So for the purposes of minutes, I don't know if this is necessarily the right room to be asking what that value should be. So I think we'll need to consult at least the Jose list and maybe the Jose designated experts for their opinion. More than just the one.
And that's fine. And again,
So for the minutes, let's add a note that the chairs will forward that request.
okay. Jim asked the question, do we have a recommendation for the SEC P256K1 whether to use uncompressed or compressed point representations, or whether indeed both are perfectly acceptable? Obviously, uncompressed will work. I would be interested in having data on, for this curve, what are people doing in the wild? I know, for instance, that no matter what you think of them, the Bitcoin people use this, and I haven't looked into how they're representing the points. Does anyone in the room know? Here comes Russ.
Russ Housley, I don't know how it's done in Bitcoin, but I do know how it's done in a bunch of other places. And there was a patent issue with compression. That patent's expired, so do what you want.
Thank you for answering the question I was going to ask.
Yeah, I knew that to be the case, that you could do either now in a legally successful way. What I didn't know whether there was existing practice that it was worth mentioning and at least referencing.
So everybody does uncompressed.
That's what I thought because of the previous patent issue. Okay. All right, well, we can discuss this more on the list. Currently, the draft doesn't say anything at all. Maybe it could. So the next steps that I view are the chairs need to make a call about whether to adopt the draft. And then assuming a working group draft gets created, at that point, I would start addressing feedback from the reviews that have been received and the discussions in this room.
So, so as Mike pointed out, that working group working group call for adoption does end today. Given all the feedback we've gotten on the list and lack of any objections here, I believe we will be adopting it. I think the one question we would have is for the two reviewers that do happen to be in the room, is it important to address those concerns before? Okay, I've gotten head shakes from both of them. So we'll send the announcement on the list by, but yes, please submit a draft IETF COSE item. We can confer afterwards as far as what the short name is, because that gets that's easier to get correct now versus later.
Okay, thank you.
So now, Russ, it's your turn.
Russ Housley, I'm going to talk about the use of hash-based signatures.
There it goes.
Okay, so the CFRG has been working on hash-based signatures since 2013. basically the draft that for the algorithm HSS LMS is in the RFC editor's queue. It's an auth 48, so we know what the number is going to be as soon as it pops. So it's 8554, and it describes an adaptation of some work that goes back to the mid-90s. Original work done by very famous cryptographers, you know, Lamport, Diffie, Winters, and Merkle. So a lot of stuff going on there, but what this group probably cares about is how does this, what are the characteristics of the algorithm? So you build a tree, it's a hash-based tree, Merkle trees, see, and the number of signatures that you can use depends on the number of leaf nodes in the tree. So it has a finite number of signatures. That's one of the biggest criticisms of this algorithm. But it has small public keys and a low computational cost. It's very fast to validate those signatures. The amount of code that's needed to validate one of those signatures is very small, which is why a lot of the IoT folks are interested in it. You just need the hash function and then some tree management stuff. In terms of the signing side, you can have a small private key if at signing time you're willing to do some extra stuff. You have a bigger private key if you want faster signing time. That's a computational memory size trade-off, right? But, the signatures, however, are quite large. And key generation is rather slow. But of course, that's only done by the signer. One of the things that that makes this attractive is that they are quantum safe signatures. So even if a quantum computer comes to pass, these signatures stand. This isn't working. Next slide, please. So this slide has the conventions right out of the Internet Draft. I'm not going to read through, you know, them, but what goes in each of the fields in the for a signature is there. If you have comments about this, please talk on the list. Next. So why are we caring about this? Like I said, the small verification code size is very attractive in the IoT space. Since it's quantum safe, a bunch of people are advocating that we use these now to sign firmware. That way, we have a way to deploy the code that implements the next generation of crypto in a safe way. If something comes along that makes this difficult, such as a large-scale quantum computer, we still have confidence in the software update integrity mechanism. So Suit has been looking at this. Suit has already decided they are using COSE. That's a decision. We're looking at this as one of the possible mandatory to implement algorithms. That discussion is going to happen later this week. So I'm hoping that, that this discussion doesn't change that. Next slide. So we already had the working group adoption of this. Some small errors were found that basically were done to align the document that is now in the RFC editor's queue and this. Jim Schad provided some comments. They were dealt with, I think, to his satisfaction. And Jim also has done an implementation now, so his COSE library now supports this. And he provided some test vectors that I could use to put at the end of the document. And I think once those two additions are done, it'll be ready for a working group last call. I think, questions?
Quỳnh Đan, I have a question. since the spec is it has a lot of options. I don't know what option did you pick in the draft?
So the way that the options are, the signature itself tells you which options were picked. So this document doesn't have to say anything about them.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, so there's code points for Mayanna that are signed at each possible step, and they are encoded in the signature itself, so you know how to.
So
parse.
who are going to specify the options to be used?
At the time you build the tree, you pick them.
Okay, so it's all right. So it's not in this draft. Okay,
That's right.
somewhere else.
John Matson, something like you just said that everything is encoded in the signature. That I think that would be very helpful information to the draft for implementers, readers.
Sure, I can add that. If it's not there, I think it is, but I'll check.
Any other comments? All right, so it sounds like for actions, then you have one more revision to do with these updates, and then we should be able to do a working group last call on that also. I mean, this is arguably the most complete of the documents that we initially took on. So if there's no objections, we can look at doing that. I think we've still got a number of things to deal with the core drafts that this shouldn't be too much of a distraction. Okay.
Great.
So for minutes, yes, we'll update, then we'll do. Okay. Share slides. All right. So the next steps for the working group. We were looking at over the between now and IETF 105, mostly in consulting with Jim, with the core BIS drafts. What we are looking to propose is having another virtual interim to discuss some of these outstanding issues again, targeting sometime in May. Again, focusing on 8152 BIS. With the idea that by IETF 105, we're either, if we're really optimistic, we might be able to see if we can get it to the state we feel we can pub rec, but most likely to get to the state that we're doing a working group last call on the BIS drafts. Also for 105, talking again with Jim and a couple other people at the hackathon, looking at attempting to do an interop, some form of interop testing at the Montreal hackathon. So anybody that has implementations, please reach out to the chairs. We'd like to start at least that planning sooner rather than later. And we'll start to put together some formal, something a little bit more formal ideas on how to structure that. Does anybody have any comments, questions, or concerns with this temporary path forward? All right. Well, at this point, we are done with what we had scheduled. So if there's any other comments or discussion anybody wants to bring up, now's the time. All right. If anybody has not signed the blue sheets, please come see us. Thank you, Francesca, for taking minutes, and Russ and Kathleen for essentially transcribing into the Jabber room also. We're a wrap, and you got an extra 15 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, Karsten, I apologize.
Yeah, just one comment on the virtual interim stuff. There is a number of working groups that are doing virtual interims repeatedly and so on. So I think it would be a nice idea to just coordinate this. So you could use one of the slots of the CBOR working group, so it's
Sure.
not so much of a change for people.
Okay. We will talk with the CBOR chairs. All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right, and propose for the working group draft. Here's the string draft IETF COSE.
What do you want to spell out algorithms? We'll send that notice out. It was really strange. We'll send that notice out today. Yeah, sure he is. We'll have to answer what happened. No, it's not good. There's a sequence of